They met long before life started asking for proof of love. Before rent payments. Before bills. Before anyone cared what kind of car you drove or what name was stitched on your shirt. Their story began in a quiet American town. The kind where everyone knows everyone. Where summer smelled like barbecue smoke and cut grass. And where hearts learned to dream before they learned to break. He was the quiet one. The thinker. The kind of boy teachers said would make it out someday. His name was Daniel Miller. And she was sunshine in sneakers, her laughter always a little too loud for the library but too beautiful to stop. Her name was Grace Carter. They grew up 3 houses apart, went to the same high school and shared everything. From comic books to heartaches about parents who worked too hard for too little. Every day after school, they'd meet under the old oak tree at the corner of Maple and 3rd. That was their spot, their secret universe. A place where time slowed down and dreams felt close enough to touch. Grace would lie back on the grass, staring at clouds, and ask, "Do you really think we'll make it out of this town one day?" And Daniel would smile that quiet smile of his and say, "Not just out, up. We'll build something that matters." He believed in building not just buildings or businesses but futures. And she believed in him. That was enough. When Daniel talked about college, she believed. When he drew plans for inventions and startups in his worn-out notebook, she believed. When he said, "One day, I'll give you the life you deserve," she laughed and said, "I already have it." It was the kind of love people write songs about. Simple, pure. The kind that thinks promises can hold back reality. But time has a way of asking questions love isn't ready to answer. Graduation came. Daniel couldn't afford college yet, so he took a job at a local garage, saving every penny for his dream of starting a small tech company. Grace, meanwhile, had offers, internships, scholarships, options. But her parents saw something else. A daughter getting older, still dating a boy with a broken-down car and too many ideas. Her mother would sigh, "Baby, love won't keep the lights on." Her father would shake his head. "You can't build a future on potential. You need stability." And then came Nathan Grant, the son of a local real estate developer. Polished, confident, the kind of man Grace's parents had prayed she'd meet. He noticed her at a charity event, bought her flowers the next day, and made promises that sounded like security. For a while, Grace ignored him. But pressure has a voice, and it often sounds like family. Soon, every dinner turned into a debate. Every visit home a reminder that love alone doesn't pay for dreams. Then one night, under the same oak tree where they'd built their promises, she showed up with red eyes and shaking hands. The crickets were loud. The wind was soft. And Daniel knew something was breaking before she said a word. "Daniel," she whispered, "my parents, they want me to marry Nathan." He laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "Grace, you told me you believed in us." "I do," she said, voice trembling. "But I can't keep watching my family struggle while I wait for things to get better. They need me to do this." He stared at her, the same girl who once said love was all they'd ever need, and suddenly realized how heavy dreams can be when one person stops believing. He took a step closer, his voice breaking. "I was building everything for you." Grace closed her eyes. "And maybe one day you will. But I can't keep waiting to breathe." She kissed him on the cheek, whispered, "I'm sorry." and walked away. He stood there long after she was gone, the streetlight flickering above him, the oak tree swaying like it understood heartbreak. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in his small room surrounded by sketches of ideas that suddenly felt meaningless. He stared at one page, the first one he ever drew with her sitting beside him. Then he whispered to himself, "It wasn't my fault she left, but maybe it's my responsibility to make sure it was worth something." The next morning he packed his things, left town without saying goodbye. And as the bus pulled away, the sunrise painted the sky in gold, a color that felt like pain and promise all at once. Because sometimes, love doesn't end with goodbye. It ends with a reason to rise. They say comfort is the sweetest poison. Tastes like peace until it starts to rot your soul. For Emily Carter, comfort came wrapped in silk and diamonds and regret. The wedding was beautiful. Cameras, champagne, and whispered envy filled the air. She smiled for every picture, held her new husband's hand, and told herself this was what she wanted, what her parents wanted, what she needed. But somewhere deep down, beneath the glitter and the vows, she could still hear Daniel's voice, quiet, honest, and breaking. Just promise me. Don't forget who you are." She had promised, and she had broken it. Months passed in gold-tinted peace. The mansion was large enough to echo. The servants smiled too quickly. The neighbors envied her new life, and for a while she convinced herself she was happy. Daniel's memory became a shadow that visited less often. The guilt dulled under the weight of designer dresses and expensive distractions. Her parents called often, proud, relieved. "You saved us, Emily," they said. "You did the right thing." But right things don't keep you warm at night. They just keep you quiet. Then came the pregnancy. For the first time in months, she felt a kind of love again. Pure, unbought, and entirely hers. She thought maybe this was redemption. Maybe the baby would give her purpose again. But after the child was born, everything changed. Her husband, Ryan, grew distant. Late nights became normal. Excuses turned to arguments. Then came the first slap. He apologized. Then came the second. And he didn't. The bruises she covered with makeup weren't the only ones that hurt. The words cut deeper. Ungrateful. Useless. You think love pays the bills. The Emily who once dreamed of art and laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet woman who walked on eggshells and smiled for survival. Meanwhile, miles away, Daniel Miller was rebuilding his life one small step at a time. He started with nothing: a rented apartment, a worn-out laptop, and a mind that refused to quit. The same drive that made him dream of a future with her now fueled something bigger. He built an app, small at first, that helped local businesses manage their finances. Within a year, it grew beyond what he ever imagined. His name began to circulate in the startup world, the kid who turned heartbreak into brilliance. But behind every success was a ghost. Her voice, her laughter, her absence. He tried dating, tried moving on, but every woman felt like a chapter he couldn't finish because the story was still stuck on her name. He told himself he was fine, that love was a distraction, that emotions were luxury for people who hadn't been broken. But deep down, Daniel knew he hadn't stopped loving Emily. He had just buried that love beneath ambition. Back in the mansion, Emily's life had turned into performance art, rehearsed, silent, mechanical. Ryan's affairs were no longer secrets. His temper no longer needed reasons. She wanted to leave, but where would she go? Her parents would call it shame. Society would call it failure. She prayed quietly every night, not for miracles, but for strength. Strength to face another day. Strength to protect her child from a home built on fear. Then one evening, after another violent outburst, she found herself sitting on the cold floor, holding her baby close as rain hammered against the window. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Daniel. I thought I was saving them, but I only lost myself." That night she made a promise, one she had no idea how to keep, to find herself again, even if it meant breaking free from everything that once looked like safety. And far away, under the same rain, Daniel looked out from his new office window, the city skyline reflecting off the glass, and whispered, "Wherever you are, I hope you're okay." Fate heard them both, and it smiled a cruel, knowing smile, because in just a few years, the same name that had once shattered them would bring them back together. Not through love, but through loss. They say time heals, but sometimes it just prepares you for the next wound. They say the universe has a cruel sense of timing. It waits until you've healed just enough to start bleeding again. For Daniel Miller, success had become his armor. Headlines called him the boy who built his own empire. Investors praised his genius. Magazines photographed him in glass offices and tailored suits. But behind the sharp smile was a man who still checked an old inbox, the one that once held her messages. Every unread email from years ago was a scar he refused to delete. He told the world he'd moved on. He told himself he'd won. But every victory tasted like something missing. Meanwhile, Emily Carter's world was cracking from the inside. Ryan's empire, the one built on charm and borrowed money, was falling apart. Investors pulled out. Friends disappeared. Debt crept in like a shadow that never slept. The mansion grew quieter. The servants left. The laughter died. And the walls that once protected her became her cage. One night, after another argument, Ryan slammed the door and didn't come back. No calls. No explanations. Just silence. Emily sat by the crib, her child asleep beside her, and realized she was free, but ruined. Freedom without direction feels a lot like drowning. Days turned into weeks. Bills piled up. Calls from the bank grew sharper. She tried selling jewelry, designer clothes, anything to stay afloat. But there's a kind of loneliness that money can't hide. And for the first time in years, she missed Daniel. Not the man, but the peace that came with his presence. Across town, Daniel stood in a boardroom, pitching his company's new expansion. His words were calm, confident, and rehearsed. But in the middle of his presentation, a name caught his eye on a document: Grant Enterprises, the company his firm was about to acquire. He froze. The logo on the screen was familiar. So was the address. Couldn't be. But it was. Ryan Grant, the man Emily had married. For a moment, Daniel forgot the cameras, the investors, the applause. He stared at that name like it had just ripped open a door he thought he'd sealed shut. Later that night, alone in his office, he whispered to himself, "After all these years, this is how fate brings her back?" The acquisition went through in weeks. Grant Enterprises was bankrupt, absorbed, erased, and Daniel Miller became the owner of everything Ryan once had. Every property, every signature, every silent ghost. Emily didn't know. Not yet. She was too busy fighting to survive, taking freelance design work from home, raising her child one small miracle at a time. Until one morning she got a call from the bank. Your property has been purchased by the new company owner. You'll need to vacate within 30 days. Her hands shook. She begged for time. The woman on the other end was kind but firm. The new owner's policy is strict, ma'am. You can reach him directly if you'd like to appeal. And then she said it, the name that made Emily's breath stop. Daniel Miller. The world tilted. Her heart raced. Her past had come to collect its debt. For hours, she sat by the window, holding the eviction letter, reading his name again and again. Part of her wanted to run. Another part, the part that had prayed for years for one more chance, whispered, maybe this is it. That night, she wrote an email she never thought she'd write. It started with one line. Daniel, I don't know if you'll read this, but if you do, please hear me out. She deleted it twice before sending. Then she waited, through a long, sleepless night, through dawn, through silence. Daniel saw the message the next morning. He didn't reply right away. He read it once, then again. Every word hurt in familiar places. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for pity. Just a meeting, to talk, to apologize. He stared at her name glowing on the screen, whispering to himself, after everything, why now? But his heart, the same one he'd buried under ambition, whispered something different, because not all unfinished stories stay buried. 2 days later, Emily Carter walked into his office. Smaller, quieter, different. Her once glamorous world had stripped her of everything except grace. And Daniel, older, colder, sharper, stood from behind his desk. For a long time, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, two timelines colliding in silence. Finally, she broke it. Hi, Daniel. He nodded slowly. Hi, Emily. That was it. 2 syllables, and the air was heavier than any storm. She looked around the room, the glass walls, the city view, the empire he built, and said softly, You made it. And he replied, voice steady, eyes distant, I had to. Someone had to prove we were worth believing in. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was history, every unspoken apology, every dream that never got to grow. Then she whispered, I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came to thank you for not turning into the person they said you would. Daniel looked at her, tired, sad, still beautiful in a way time couldn't erase, and said, I don't know if that's a compliment or a curse. They both smiled, barely, because sometimes closure doesn't come with peace, comes with memory. But just as she stood to leave, Daniel noticed something in her bag. A small drawing, a child's drawing, of a woman, a little boy, and a man standing beside them. He froze, and in a low voice asked, Emily, who's the boy's father? She didn't answer right away. Tears filled her eyes before her words did. Then she whispered, You already know. Daniel's heart stopped. The air went still, and the city outside their window faded into silence. Because suddenly, Love wasn't their only unfinished story. They say some truths don't break you, they unmake you, piece by piece, breath by breath. For Daniel Miller, that moment felt like standing on the edge of a cliff he didn't know he'd been climbing. Her words, soft, trembling, almost a whisper, echoed in his head like a gunshot. You already know. He wanted to speak, to breathe, to understand, but everything inside him went still. His hands shook slightly, but his voice didn't. How old is he? 3, Emily said. Her voice cracked. He just turned 3 last month. Daniel turned away, pacing toward the glass wall that overlooked the city. The skyline shimmered against the dusk, gold, gray, endless. And for the first time in years, it felt meaningless. 3, he repeated quietly. That's right after you got married. Emily nodded. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after Ryan disappeared on one of his business trips. I thought I could handle it. I thought maybe it was God's way of giving me a reason to stay strong. Daniel's jaw clenched. And you didn't think I had the right to know? Tears welled in her eyes, but she held his gaze. At first, I wanted to tell you. I wrote letters, dozens of them, but I never sent them. You were becoming everything I'd hoped for you. I didn't want to be the person who showed up with a past and wrecked your future. Daniel turned back to face her. His expression wasn't anger, it was disbelief. Quiet, raw ache. You didn't wreck my future, Emily. You were my future. The silence between them stretched. The city moved on outside, cars honking, lights flickering. But in that room, time had stopped. Finally, she said, "His name is Noah." Daniel closed his eyes, the name hitting him like a wave. Noah. Emily continued, her voice shaking. He's smart, kind. He loves to draw just like you used to. Every time he smiles, I see you. He swallowed hard. Does he know? She shook her head. He thinks Ryan was his father, but Ryan never cared. He never even tried to be one. Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead. He wanted to feel joy, pride, even, but all he could taste was lost time. 3 birthdays. 3 years of first words. First steps. First laughs he'd never heard. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. Why tell me now? Because I can't keep living like a ghost, she said. And because he deserves to know where he comes from. I won't lie to him anymore. Daniel looked at her, eyes burning. And what do you expect me to do, Emily? Pretend it's fine? Pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. Her tears fell then, quietly, freely. No, I just need you to know the truth. What you do with it, that's up to you. For a long time, neither moved. Then, finally, Daniel whispered, I want to see him. Emily nodded slowly. He's at school now. But, if you're sure. I'm sure. That weekend, Daniel drove to a quiet neighborhood on the city's edge. A modest house with peeling paint and a small yard filled with children's toys. When Emily opened the door, she wasn't dressed like the woman he'd once known. No makeup, no mask. Just a tired grace that came from surviving too much and giving too much love. Inside, laughter echoed down the hallway. And then him, Noah. A little boy with curly brown hair, wide gray-blue eyes, and a paint-stained shirt that said Dream Big. He ran to his mother holding a drawing. Mommy, look, it's us. Then he looked up at Daniel. The room went quiet. Noah tilted his head curiously. Mommy, who's that? Emily's lips trembled, but she smiled gently. That's a friend of Mommy's. Noah walked closer, holding up his drawing. A stick figure family under a tree. Do you like to draw too? He asked. Daniel's throat tightened. I used to, he said softly. Noah grinned. You can draw with me. I'm really good at trees. Emily turned away, tears streaming silently. Daniel crouched down, meeting his son's eyes. Those same eyes he saw every morning in the mirror, and whispered, Yeah, buddy, I'd like that. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Emily and Daniel sat on the porch in silence. The air was cool. The stars were faint. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I just wanted you to know him. Daniel nodded, staring at the small window where Noah's nightlight glowed. I don't know what this means yet. I just know I don't want to lose him. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, there was peace in her eyes. Then don't. He turned to her, voice quiet but steady. Maybe we can't fix what we broke, Emily, but maybe we can raise what we built. She smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted. As the night deepened, two people who had lost everything found something neither expected. Not a second chance at love, but the beginning of forgiveness. Because sometimes the universe doesn't bring people back to repeat the past. It brings them back to rewrite it. They say peace doesn't last long for people who've earned it the hard way. Tests you, teases you, and sometimes it knocks just to see if you've really healed. For a few months, Daniel Miller finally felt something he hadn't in years, purpose that wasn't measured in profit. He wasn't just the CEO everyone admired. He was Dad. He'd pick Noah up from school, teach him little things like how to ride a bike or how to dream without fear. They built Lego castles, baked messy pancakes, and fell asleep watching cartoons neither of them really understood. For the first time, Daniel's life wasn't about success. It was about connection. Every smile, every laugh from that little boy filled a hole that no amount of wealth ever could. And Emily? She was healing too. Slowly, softly. She found work at a small art studio downtown, helping children paint stories out of broken colors. Every day, she came home to laughter instead of bruises, to warmth instead of noise. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, until the past came knocking. Literally. It was a Friday afternoon. Rain again, always rain when fate decides to stir things up. Emily was at home when she heard it. A firm, familiar knock on her door. She opened it and froze. Ryan, the man she'd once called husband, stood there. Thinner, meaner, eyes wild with something between regret and desperation. He looked like a ghost who hadn't rested since the day he vanished. Emily, he said, forcing a smirk. You look good. Better than I expected. She stepped back instinctively. What are you doing here, Ryan? He glanced around the small house, sneering. This is where you live now. After everything I gave you. What you gave me. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. You gave me fear, Ryan. You gave me silence. He scoffed. Oh, please. You were nothing before me. Just then, Noah's small voice called from inside. Mommy, who's at the door? Ryan's eyes flicked toward the sound. Curious. Sharp. And in that instant, Emily knew this wasn't just a visit. It was a threat. "Is that him?" he asked quietly, stepping closer. "My son." Her heart pounded. "He's not yours." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You mean to tell me after all I did for you, you had another man's kid under my name?" "Ryan, leave," she said firmly, "before I call the police." He smirked, leaning closer. "You think your new boyfriend can protect you? I know who he is, Emily. Daniel Miller, the genius who bought my company. My name still echoes because of him." That name, Daniel Miller, spilled out like poison. That evening, Daniel got a call from an unknown number. A voice, low and bitter, said, "You took my company. Now you're trying to take my family." Then the line went dead. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something he thought he'd buried: fear. Not for himself, but for Emily and Noah. He drove to her house that night, found her trembling by the kitchen window, phone in hand. When she saw him, she broke down. "He came back," she whispered. "He knows." Daniel held her tight. "He's not taking anything from you again. Not now. Not ever." The following days were a blur of court filings, restraining orders, and security details. Daniel moved them into a safer home, quiet, gated, hidden from the headlines. He tried to keep the story private, but stories like theirs don't stay quiet for long. One morning, Daniel walked into his office to see the headline plastered across every major outlet: Daniel Miller's secret family scandal. The woman, the child, and the fallen tycoon. His PR team panicked. Investors called. The board demanded explanations. But Daniel didn't flinch. For once, he didn't care what the world thought. He stood before a sea of microphones and simply said, "Yes, I'm a father. Yes, I made mistakes. But sometimes responsibility doesn't start with fault. It starts with choice. And I choose them." The room went silent. Cameras flashed. And just like that, Daniel Miller, the man who once measured life in numbers, became something else entirely: human. That night, Emily watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. No grand speeches. No rehearsed perfection. Just truth. When Daniel returned home, she met him at the door. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He smiled, exhausted but sincere. "I did, because it wasn't my fault how we broke. But it's my responsibility to make sure Noah grows up knowing love doesn't have to." She looked at him, the man she once left behind, and for the first time, she didn't see the boy who dreamed under the oak tree. She saw the man who had finally become what he was meant to be. Later that night, as rain whispered against the window, Daniel tucked Noah into bed. The little boy looked up at him sleepily and asked, "Daddy, are we safe now?" Daniel smiled faintly, brushing a hand through his son's hair. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "We're safe now." And for the first time in a long, long time, he meant it, because love had failed them once, but responsibility had rebuilt them. So tell me, if you were Daniel, would you forgive? And if you were Emily, would you believe love deserves another chance? Before you scroll, hit that like button if this story made you feel something. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because the next story might just be your reflection. This is Echoes of Reality by Achiever. where every heart finds its echo.
Subscribe for more echoes.